and you said at that meeting, from now on, the leaders of IMF and the World Bank must be chosen on merit. 2008 is 18 years ago. 18 years have passed. Even now, to become the head of the IMF, you must be a European. To become the head of the World Bank, you must be an American. And 88% of the world's population don't qualify to run a world's institution. Now that is so unwise. So unwise. These are supposed to be global institutions. Why do you insist that only Westerners can run it? Why do you say only 12% of the world can run the world's institutions? Clearly, these are decisions made by your leaders. And all these decisions will come to haunt you as the world changes now. So let me turn to part 2 and to talk about the new multi-civilizational world and why the rest of the 88% who in many ways accepted Western domination are no longer going to do so. And the first re-emergence of a strong human civilization, of course, is Chinese civilization. And as I mentioned earlier, from the Chinese people's point of view, the past 40 years of economic social development have been the best 40 years of economic and social development. And one would have thought that the West would, of course, celebrate the fact, hey, the Chinese people are thriving. They are flourishing. We should celebrate. Instead, the reality is that even though China is succeeding and thriving, if you pick up the Anglo-Saxon media and read about China, you will just see the constant demonization of China as an evil communist regime running China. And there's no doubt that China is run by the Communist Party of China. But the goal of the Communist Party of China is not to revive communism. The goal of the Chinese Communist Party is to revive the great Chinese civilization. But as you know, in geopolitics, what you need to do to justify when you have to take stands against a competitor, you have to demonize the competitor. And that's why when the House of Representatives of the United States Congress set up a committee and said, this is a committee to manage the strategic competition between the United States of America and the Communist Party of China. But the real competition is not against the Communist Party of China. The real competition is with the Chinese civilization that has decided to come back at this moment. And again, what's amazing is that so few in the West are aware that Chinese civilization, for most of human history, has performed as well as the West. And again, it's only in the last 200 years that China, and also India, by the way, fell behind. But that falling behind was an aberration. And it's interesting that many in the West believe that your job, of course, is to try and promote democracy in China. And you ask that, and you say, why can't the Chinese accept this great Western gift of democracy to China? The reason the Chinese are suspicious is that when they were very weak and defenseless, you didn't try to feed democracy to them. You stuffed their mouths with opium. You forced China to accept opium in return for Chinese tea in 1842. The Chinese learned a very powerful lesson. When you're weak, the West will take advantage of you. Now that they are strong and successful, the West wants to export democracy to them. And if the Chinese are not suspicious, there will be something dramatically wrong with the Chinese. They know that as China becomes stronger, it is perceived to be more and more as a threat to the West. And what the West will try to do is therefore try to weaken China rather than strengthen China. And so, at the same time, just to emphasize how what the forces that are driving this re-emergence of China, and maybe I should just give you one point of data so you understand how dramatically power is shifting in the world, by the way. In the year 2000, when the 21st century opened, the combined GNP of the European Union was 7 times bigger than China. 7 times. Today, they're about the same size. By 2050, the European Union will be half the size of China. Believe me, such major structural shifts of history don't happen that often. We just happen to be living at a time of major structural shifts that are happening. And remarkably, as that is happening, one would logically assume that the European Union would then learn to be a bit more modest in speaking to China. Instead, it's for the rest of the world. It's absolutely amazing to see the leaders of the European Union, like Elizabeth von der Leyen, like Kaja Kallas, make these incredibly condescending, dismissive remarks about China. I think just 2 days ago, Kaja Kallas, the foreign minister of the European Union, called China cancer. Cancer. And it's important to understand, why do people behave like that in the West towards China? There are deeper roots. And there's one thing that nobody wants to talk about, but which is a real factor in this new world. And this real factor is something that is deeply buried in the Western mind, the fear of the yellow peril. Now, you can say, oh, come on. We are so rational and educated, and we're not going to be subject to such fears of the yellow peril. But it's been around in Western literature, in Fu Manchu, in various other figures. And there's one statistic, one important historical fact I point out. 130 years ago, the United States Congress passed an act. And the name of the act was the Chinese Racial Exclusion Act. 130 years ago. Why? Fear of the yellow peril. So as a result of all these factors, the West has decided to completely misunderstand China and not see what is emerging is just the re-emergence of a great civilization returning to its normal place in the world, and therefore creating the multi-civilizational world that is coming. So what's going to happen over the next 20 to 30 years as we try to adjust to this new world that is coming? And as far as I see, as you guys, no one can see the future, okay? I mean, to give you just a simple example of why you can't see the future, on February 28th, that's about less than 3 months ago, when the United States and Israel decided to bomb Iran was completely defenseless. Couldn't shoot down a single American plane, couldn't shoot down a single Israeli plane. And I thought, game, set, match, everything is over. Iran will collapse in 3 to 4 days, and US and Israel will win, right? That would be the logical, rational thing to anticipate. Isn't it hard to believe that the result today is almost the exact opposite? That this defenseless country, just by seizing one strait, has now rebalanced the world order. Small example. From a relatively weak, defenseless country. But of course, people forget the most important thing about Iran, which is important to bear in mind about this new world that's coming. At the end of the day, the Persian civilization is one of the greatest civilizations of world history. They've been around only for 3,000 years, and they have suffered so many near-death moments and overcame them. The mistake was to underestimate Persian civilization. And by the way, underestimating Chinese civilization, therefore, is a much, much bigger mistake. It's a different scale. So where are we going to go? Well, number one possible outcome is that the West, led by the United States, will apply maximum pressure to try and stop the rise of China. This is not an illusion on my part. I go to Washington, D.C. enough, and the Washington, D.C. as a capital is deeply divided. The Republicans and Democrats cannot agree on anything, but the one thing they agree on, it's time to stop the rise of China. So one scenario which is quite possible is that the US and the West will step up its efforts to stop the rise of China. And that, as you can well imagine, will mean a very uncomfortable world for us, and that will lead to lots of consequences and so on and so forth. But I hope that one note of caution that everyone in the West should be aware of is that, unlike in the Cold War, when the United States carried out a successful containment policy of the Soviet Union, many countries joined the West in containing the Soviet Union, including third world countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, Egypt, Congo, all joined the West. This time around, the rest of the world is not going to join the West in trying to contain China. So I always tell my American friends, think twice. Your efforts to stop the rise of China are not going to succeed. But nonetheless, there's at least a 20% chance that this maximum pressure will continue. The most likely scenario, for which I give odds of 60%, is that in one way the world will, as usual, muddle through. That's what often happens. I mean, there's no question that the United States, maybe after Trump, the strange thing about the Trump administration is that the Trump administration is hawkish on China. But the least hawkish member of the Trump administration is President Donald Trump. His recent visit to China was amazing, how pragmatic he was in his behavior towards China. And he's actually created a better world. So for the next at least 6 to 12 months, we'll have relative stability thanks to his pragmatic policies towards China. And of course, I know in this room, no one ever gives President Trump credit for anything. But you have to acknowledge that his pragmatism has been very good for the US, good for China, and good for the world, especially for countries in the neighborhood. By the way, I come from Southeast Asia, and for us to having relatively stable relations is good for us between US and China. And of course, the last scenario, for which I give another low probability of 20%, is that the West will finally become enlightened and say, yes, let's admit it. The world has changed. We in the West, we can no longer dominate the world. Why don't we form partnerships with other civilizations, treat them with respect, acknowledge that they're different from us, acknowledge that they'll never be like us, but we can live in peace with them. So my hope is that all of you here in this room will spread the enlightened message to the rest of the world. Thank you very much.